Paul Erdos was a Hungarian mathematician. He was one of the most prolific mathematicians of the 20th century. He was known both for his social practice of mathematics and for his eccentric lifestyle. Erdos pursued problems in combinatorics, graph theory, number theory, classical analysis, approximation theory, set theory, and probability theory. Early life, education, life, and death. Paul Erdos was born in Budapest, Austria-Hungary, on March 26, 1913. He was the only surviving child of Anna and Lajos Erdos. His two sisters, aged 3 and 5, died a few days before he was born. His parents were both Jewish mathematics teachers from a vibrant intellectual community. His fascination with mathematics developed early. By the age of 4, given the person's age, he could calculate, in his head, how many seconds they had lived. Both of Erdos's parents were high school mathematics teachers, and Erdos received much of his early education from them. Erdos always remembered his parents with great affection. At 16, his father introduced him to two of his lifetime favorite subjects, infinite series and set theory. During high school, Erdos became an ardent solver of the problems proposed each month in Commel, the mathematical and physical monthly for secondary schools. Erdos later published several articles in it about problems in elementary plane geometry. In 1934, at the age of 21, he was awarded a doctorate in mathematics from the University of Budapest. Erdos's thesis advisor was Leopold Fejér, who was also the thesis advisor for John von Neumann, George Polya, and Paul Turun. Much of his family, including two of his aunts, two of his uncles, and his father died in Budapest during the Holocaust. His mother survived in hiding. He was living in America and working at the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study at the time. On September 20, 1996, at the age of 83, he had a heart attack and died while attending a conference in Warsaw. He never married and had no children. He is buried next to his mother and father in grave 17A6-29 at Kozmaruk Kőtemete in Budapest. For his epitaph, he suggested, "I've finally stopped getting dumber." His life was documented in the film Men is a Number, a portrait of Paul Erdos, made while he was still alive, and posthumously in the book The Man Who Loved Only Numbers. Erdos's name contains the Hungarian letter O, but is often incorrectly written as Erdos or Erdos either by mistake or out of typographical necessity. Personality. Another proof. Paul Erdos' possessions meant little to Erdos. Most of his belongings would fit in a suitcase, as dictated by his itinerant lifestyle. Awards and other earnings were generally donated to people in need and various worthy causes. He spent most of his life as a vagabond, traveling between scientific conferences, universities and the homes of colleagues all over the world. He earned enough in stipends from universities as a guest lecturer, and from various mathematical awards to fund his travels and basic needs. Money left over he used to fund cash prizes for proofs of Erdos' problems. He would typically show up at a colleague's doorstep and announce, "My brain is open," staying long enough to collaborate on a few papers before moving on a few days later. In many cases, he would ask the current collaborator about whom to visit next. His colleague Alfred Rieckuten said, "A mathematician is a machine for turning coffee into theorems," and Erdos drank copious quantities. After 1971 he also took amphetamines, despite the concern of his friends, one of whom bet to him $500 that he could not stop taking the drug for a month. Erdos won the bet, but complained that during his abstinence, mathematics had been set back by a month. Before, when I looked at a piece of blank paper my mind was filled with ideas. Now all I see is a blank piece of paper. After he won the bet, he promptly resumed his amphetamine use. He had his own idiosyncratic vocabulary. Although an agnostic atheist, he spoke of the book, a visualization of a book in which God had written down the best and most elegant proofs for mathematical theorems. Lecturing in 1985, he said, "You don't have to believe in God, but you should believe in the book." He himself doubted the existence of God, whom he called the supreme fascist. He accused SF of hiding his socks and Hungarian passports, and of keeping the most elegant mathematical proofs to himself. When he saw a particularly beautiful mathematical proof, he would exclaim, "This one's from the book." This later inspired a book titled Proofs from the Book. Other idiosyncratic elements of Erdos's vocabulary include: children were referred to as epsilons, women were bosses, men were slaves, people who stopped doing mathematics had died, people who physically died had left, alcoholic drinks were poison, music was noise, people who had married were captured, people who had divorced were liberated. To give a mathematical lecture was to preach. To give an oral exam to a student was to torture him, her. He gave nicknames to many countries, examples being: the US was Samland, the Soviet Union was Jodam, and Israel was Israel. Career. In 1934, he moved to Manchester, England, to be a guest lecturer. In 1938, he accepted his first American position as a scholarship holder at Princeton University. At this time, he began to develop the habit of traveling from campus to campus. He would not stay long in one place and traveled back and forth among mathematical institutions until his death. In 1952, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services denied Erdos, a Hungarian citizen, a re-entry visa into the United States, for reasons that have never been fully explained. Teaching at the University of Notre Dame at the time, Erdos could have chosen to remain in the country. Instead, he packed up and left, albeit requesting reconsideration from the U.S. Immigration Services at periodic intervals. Hungary, back then, was under the Warsaw Pact with the Soviet Union. Although Hungary limited the freedom of its own citizens to enter and exit the country, it gave Erdos the exclusive privilege of being allowed to enter and exit the country as he pleased in 1956. The U.S. Immigration Services later on granted a visa in 1963 to Erdos, and he resumed including American universities in his teaching and travels. 10 years later, the 60-year-old Erdos left voluntarily from Hungary in 1973. During the last decades of his life, Erdos received at least 15 honorary doctorates. He became a member of the scientific academies of 8 countries, including the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and the UK Royal Society. Shortly before his death, he renounced his honorary degree from the University of Waterloo over what he considered to be unfair treatment of colleague Adrian Bondi. Mathematical work. Erdos was one of the most prolific publishers of papers in mathematical history. Comparable only with Leonhard Euler, Erdos published more papers, mostly in collaboration with other mathematicians, while Euler published more pages, mostly by himself. Erdos wrote around 1,525 mathematical articles in his lifetime, mostly with co-authors. He strongly believed in and practiced mathematics as a social activity, having 511 different collaborators in his lifetime. In his mathematical style, Erdos was much more of a problem solver than a theory developer. Joel Spencer states that his place in the 20th century mathematical pantheon is a matter of some controversy because he resolutely concentrated on particular theorems and conjectures throughout his illustrious career. Erdos never won the highest mathematical prize, the Fields Medal, nor did he co-author a paper with anyone who did, a pattern that extends to other prizes. He did win the Wolf Prize, where his contribution is described as, for his numerous contributions to number theory, combinatorics, probability, set theory and mathematical analysis, and for personally stimulating mathematicians the world over. In contrast, the works of the three winners after were recognized as outstanding, classic, and profound, and the three before as fundamental or seminal. Of his contributions, the development of Ramsey theory and the application of the probabilistic method especially stand out. Extremal combinatorics owes to him a whole approach, derived in part from the tradition of analytic number theory. Erdos found a proof for Bertrand's postulate which proved to be far neater than Chebyshev's original one. He also discovered the first elementary proof for the prime number theorem, along with Atle Selberg. However, the circumstances leading up to the proofs, as well as publication disagreements, led to a bitter dispute between Erdos and Selberg. Erdos also contributed to fields in which he had little real interest, such as topology, where he is credited as the first person to give an example of a totally disconnected topological space that is not zero-dimensional. Erdos' problems throughout his career. Erdos would offer payments for solutions to unresolved problems. These ranged from $25 for problems that he felt were just out of the reach of the current mathematical thinking, to several $1,000s for problems that were both difficult to attack and mathematically significant. There are thought to be at least 1,000 such unpaid payments, though there is no official or comprehensive list. The offers remain active despite Erdos's death. Ronald Graham is the administrator of solutions. The solvers can get either the original check signed by Erdos before his death or a cashable check from Graham. Perhaps the most mathematically notable of these problems is the Erdos conjecture on arithmetic progressions. If the sum of the reciprocals of a sequence of integers diverges, then the sequence contains arithmetic progressions of arbitrary length. If true, it would solve several other open problems in number theory. The payment for the solution of the problem is currently worth $5,000. The most familiar problem with an Erdos prize is likely the Kretts conjecture, also called the 3n+1 problem. Erdos offered $500 for a solution. Collaborators. His most frequent collaborators include Hungarian mathematicians András Sarkozy and András Hajnal, and American mathematician Ralph Fordry. Other frequent collaborators were Békéscsellé Bolobász, Stefan Burr, Fan Chung, Zoltán Fürdi, Ron Graham, Andris Kiafas, Richard R. Hall, Istvan Jew, Eric Charles Milner, Melvin B. Nathanson, Jean-Louis Nicolas, Janos Pak, George Baranian, Carl Pomerantz, Richard Rado, A.R. Reddy, Alfred Ariakutnyi, Pal Revis, Wojciech Rodl, C.C. Russo, Richard Shelp, John Selfridge, Miklos Simonovitz, Vera Essos, Joel Spencer, Ernst G. Strauss, Endra Simareddy, Pal Turan, ZSOLT Tuzza. For other co-authors of Erdos, see the list of people with Erdos number 1 and list of people by Erdos number. Erdos number. Because of his prolific output, friends created the Erdos number as a tribute. An Erdos number describes a person's degree of separation from Erdos himself, based on their collaboration with him, or with another who has their own Erdos number. Erdos alone was assigned the Erdos number of 0, while his immediate collaborators could claim an Erdos number of 1. Their collaborators have Erdos number at most 2, and so on. Approximately 200,000 mathematicians have an assigned Erdos number, and some have estimated that 90% of the world's active mathematicians have an Erdos number smaller than 8. Several studies have shown that leading mathematicians tend to have particularly low Erdos numbers. For example, only 134,007 mathematicians have an Erdos number, with a median value of 5. In contrast, the median Erdos number of Fields medalists is 3. Only 7,097 of mathematicians with a collaboration path have an Erdos number of 2 or less. Collaboration distances will necessarily increase over long time scales. As mathematicians with low Erdos numbers die and become unavailable for collaboration, the American Mathematical Society provides a free online tool to determine the Erdos number of every mathematical author listed in the Mathematical Reviews catalog. The Erdos number was most likely first defined by Caspar Goffman, an analyst whose own Erdos number is 2. Goffman published his observations about Erdos's prolific collaboration in a 1969 article titled, "And What is Your Erdos Number?" Jerry Grossman has written that it could be argued that Baseball Hall of Famer Hank Aaron can be considered to have an Erdos number of 1 because they both autographed the same baseball when Emory University awarded them honorary degrees on the same day. Erdos numbers have also been proposed for an infant, a horse, and several actors. Signature. Erdos signed his name, Paul Erdos Pgom. When he became 60 he added LD, at 65 AD, at 70 LD, and at 75 CD. Pgom represented poor great old man. LD represented living dead. AD represented archaeological discovery. LD represented legally dead. CD represented counts dead. Books about Erdos. Erdos is the subject of at least 3 books, 2 biographies and a 2013 children's picture book by Deborah Heiligman.